The courtroom was filled with an almost tangible tension, the kind that made every sound feel magnified and every glance seem more weighted. It was a pivotal day for young Marcus, a shy, quiet boy of only 8 years old. His deep brown eyes, filled with a mixture of hope and fear, scanned the faces in the room, faces of strangers who held the power to change his life forever. Seated beside him were Sarah and Michael, a kind-hearted couple who had opened their hearts and home to Marcus over the past year. Today was supposed to be the final step in making their family official, his adoption. The judge, an older man with silver-streaked hair and an authoritative presence, adjusted his glasses as he leafed through the stack of papers in front of him. His voice was calm but firm as he began the proceedings. "We're here today to finalize the adoption of Marcus James," he said, glancing at the boy with a warm, reassuring smile. Marcus shifted in his chair, clutching a small, worn teddy bear, a gift from Sarah on the first day he came to live with them. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath as the judge continued, asking routine questions about the couple's ability to provide for Marcus and their understanding of the responsibilities of parenthood. Sarah answered with her usual gentleness, her voice steady despite the emotions simmering just beneath the surface. Michael, a man of few words, nodded in agreement, his arm resting protectively on the back of Marcus's chair. For most people in the room, it seemed like a straightforward case. Marcus had no living relatives willing or able to care for him, and Sarah and Michael had passed every background check and home evaluation with flying colors. But as the judge prepared to make his final ruling, he paused, his gaze lingering on Marcus. "Marcus," the judge said softly, leaning forward slightly, "do you understand what's happening today?" The boy nodded hesitantly, his grip tightening on the teddy bear. "And do you want Sarah and Michael to be your parents?" the judge asked, his tone encouraging. For a moment, the room was silent. Marcus looked down at his bear, then up at Sarah and Michael, who smiled at him with unwavering support. Taking a deep breath, he finally spoke, a single word that no one could have expected. The word was so quiet, so unexpected, that the judge leaned forward, his expression shifting from calm professionalism to something closer to alarm. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice sharp now. Marcus repeated the word, this time with more clarity, his young voice trembling but resolute. The judge's face went pale, his hand frozen mid-motion as he reached for his gavel. Then, in a voice that seemed to shake the very walls of the courtroom, he shouted, "Call 911 now." Gasps erupted around the room as chaos unfolded. Sarah clutched Marcus tightly, her face a mask of confusion and fear, while Michael stood, his protective instincts on full display. The courtroom staff sprang into action, some dialing emergency services, others moving to secure the area. Marcus, still clutching his bear, looked around with wide eyes, clearly frightened by the commotion his simple word had caused. And as the sirens in the distance grew louder, the question on everyone's mind was the same. What had this little boy said that could provoke such a dramatic reaction? The sound of hurried footsteps filled the courtroom as a pair of officers burst through the doors, their radios crackling faintly. The judge, now visibly shaken, pointed toward Marcus without saying a word, his hand trembling slightly. The officers exchanged confused glances, unsure of what exactly had warranted the emergency call, but they immediately moved closer to the boy. Sarah instinctively pulled Marcus closer to her, her arms wrapping around him protectively. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice quivering but firm. Michael stepped forward, placing himself between his family and the approaching officers. "Someone needs to explain what's happening here," he said, his tone laced with both anger and fear. The judge raised a hand, signaling for calm, though his own nerves were clearly fraying. "Everyone needs to remain where they are," he said, his voice trying to reclaim its authority. His eyes darted between Marcus and the officers. "I need to confirm something before we proceed." The officers hesitated, their movements slowing as they looked to the judge for further instructions. Meanwhile, Marcus's small frame trembled against Sarah, his face buried in her shoulder. She whispered soft reassurances to him, though her heart raced with every passing second. "Marcus," the judge said again, his voice softer now, but still carrying an edge of urgency. Can you tell us what you just said? Please, it's very important. The boy's head lifted slightly, his tear-filled eyes meeting the judge's. He didn't speak immediately, his lips trembling as if he were afraid of repeating himself. Sarah stroked his back gently, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. You can say it again." With a shaky breath, Marcus finally whispered the word once more. This time, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence, everyone hanging on to the sound as if it held the key to some unspeakable truth. One of the officers leaned closer to the judge, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Is this some kind of code? Or—" He didn't finish the sentence, his expression shifting to one of cautious concern. The judge shook his head slightly but didn't offer any clarification. Instead, he motioned for the officers to step back and pulled his phone from the bench, dialing a number directly. As the call connected, his voice dropped to a near whisper, making it impossible for anyone else in the room to hear the conversation. His expression grew increasingly grim with every passing second, his free hand gripping the edge of the bench tightly. When he finally ended the call, he turned to the room with an expression that was both apologetic and resolute. "I need everyone to remain calm," the judge said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the growing murmurs among the courtroom staff and onlookers. "This situation is more complicated than it appears. For now, Marcus and his guardians will need to be taken to a secure location." "What?" Sarah's voice broke through the tension, her disbelief evident. She tightened her hold on Marcus, shaking her head. "No one is taking him anywhere without an explanation." Michael, who had remained silent up until now, stepped closer to the bench. His towering frame and determined expression seemed to command the room's attention. "Judge, with all due respect, you owe us some answers. What could a child possibly have said to warrant this kind of reaction?" The judge hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to explain and the weight of whatever knowledge he was carrying. He exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I can't disclose everything at this moment," he began, his tone heavy with regret. "But what Marcus said, it raises serious concerns that need immediate attention." Sarah looked down at Marcus, who was now clutching his bear so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. She crouched slightly, her voice soft but firm as she spoke to him. "Marcus, sweetheart, do you know why everyone is so worried? Can you tell me what you meant when you said that word?" The boy's eyes welled up with fresh tears as he shook his head. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's just something I heard before." "Before?" Sarah pressed gently, trying to piece together the fragments of information. "Where did you hear it, Marcus? Was it something from your old home?" Marcus hesitated, his small fingers fidgeting with the bear's ear. "I think it was when I was with my other family," he said finally, his words barely audible. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Sarah and Michael exchanged a look, the weight of Marcus's past suddenly looming over them. Before he had come into their lives, Marcus had been through a series of foster homes, some of which had been less than ideal. But he rarely spoke about those times, and when he did, his memories were often fragmented and unclear. The judge, who had been listening intently, cleared his throat. "This confirms my concern," he said, his voice taking on a somber tone. "What Marcus said may be connected to events that are currently under investigation. That's all I can reveal for now, but it's imperative that we act quickly to ensure his safety." Michael's jaw tightened as he placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You're saying he might be in danger," he said, his words more of a statement than a question. The judge nodded. "Possibly, and not just him." Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, their wailing pitch growing louder as emergency vehicles converged on the courthouse. The officers in the room straightened, their hands instinctively resting on their holsters as they prepared for the unknown. Sarah pulled Marcus even closer, her protective instincts overriding her fear. "Whatever is going on," she said firmly, "we're not leaving his side. If he's in danger, then we're staying with him. He's our son." The judge's expression softened slightly at her words, but the tension in the room remained palpable. "I understand your position, Mrs. Carter," he said, addressing her directly. "And I promise we'll do everything in our power to protect your family. But for now, we need to move quickly. There's no time to waste. As the courtroom doors opened to reveal a team of additional officers and a plainclothes detective, Marcus buried his face in Sarah's shoulder once more, his small body trembling against hers. Whatever he had unknowingly unleashed with his single word, it was clear that life as they knew it was about to change forever. The detective stepped forward, his calm demeanor contrasting the tension crackling through the room. He introduced himself as Detective Harris, his voice steady yet cautious. "We're here to help, but we need to act quickly. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, I know this is overwhelming, but Marcus might have information that connects to an ongoing investigation." Michael crossed his arms, his protective instincts kicking into high gear. "He's a child," he said firmly. "You're talking like he's some kind of witness. Whatever you think he knows, he doesn't even understand it." Detective Harris nodded, his expression softening. "You're right, Mr. Carter. Marcus may not understand the weight of what he said, but sometimes kids notice things adults overlook. They hear things, remember details in ways we don't. This word, whatever it means, is connected to something dangerous. It's our job to figure out how and why without scaring him more than he already is." Sarah knelt beside Marcus, brushing a curl from his forehead. "Sweetheart, we're going to keep you safe," she whispered. "No one is going to hurt you. Can you try to remember where you heard that word? Was it someone talking to you? Did you see something?" Marcus looked up at her with wide, teary eyes, his small voice trembling as he spoke. It was the man in the blue car," he said hesitantly. "He said it on the phone when he came to see me." Sarah's stomach twisted. "The man in the blue car?" she asked gently. "When was this?" Marcus clutched his teddy bear tighter, thinking hard. "When I was with my other family," he said finally. "He used to come sometimes, but he didn't talk to me much, just to the other people." Detective Harris scribbled in a small notebook, his expression grim. "Do you remember what the man looked like, Marcus? Or anything about the car?" Marcus hesitated, his brows furrowing in concentration. "He was tall," he said after a long pause. "And he wore sunglasses. The car, it had a dent on the side." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath as Harris exchanged a meaningful glance with the officers. "That might be enough to go on," he murmured, stepping back to make a call. Meanwhile, Sarah and Michael were left trying to process the unsettling revelation. Sarah's mind raced, replaying every moment since Marcus had entered their lives. She thought of the scars on his arms, the nightmares that woke him in the middle of the night. It was clear now that his past was more complicated and more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever this is," he said quietly, "we'll face it together. He's our son, and we're not going to let anything happen to him." Detective Harris returned, his face lined with concern. "We've identified a possible connection," he said, his voice low. "There's a group we've been tracking for months, an underground network involved in illegal activities, smuggling, fraud, worse. That word," Marcus said, "is a known code they use to signal an operation is compromised." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Are you saying Marcus might have been part of something like that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know for sure," Harris replied carefully. "But it's possible someone involved with that group crossed paths with him during his time in foster care. If that's the case, he might know more than he realizes, things they don't want anyone finding out." Michael's fists clenched at his sides. "So now what?" he demanded. "You're saying my son is a target because of something he didn't even know he saw or heard." Harris held up a hand, trying to calm him. "That's why we're here, to make sure he's protected while we figure out what's going on. But I need you both to understand the gravity of the situation. If these people think Marcus knows something that could expose them, they won't hesitate to act." The weight of his words settled over them like a dark cloud. Sarah instinctively pulled Marcus closer, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought of the mysterious man in the blue car, the way Marcus had described him with such detail. Who was he? What role had he played in Marcus's life before they adopted him? As the officers coordinated a plan to move the family to a secure location, Sarah noticed Marcus staring at something in the corner of the courtroom. His face was pale, his lips trembling. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, following his gaze. Marcus pointed silently, his finger trembling as it aimed toward a man in the back of the room. He was dressed inconspicuously, blending in with the other onlookers, but his eyes were fixed on Marcus with an intensity that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "That's him," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "The man in the blue car." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. The man was here, watching them, and he wasn't alone. Detective Harris followed her line of sight, his expression hardening as he noticed the man. He motioned subtly to the officers, who began to fan out across the room, their hands resting on their holsters. "Stay calm," Harris said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "We've got this under control." But Sarah's instincts screamed otherwise. The man in the corner shifted slightly, his gaze darting to the exits as if calculating his next move. Marcus buried his face in her shoulder, trembling uncontrollably. As the officers moved in, the man suddenly bolted, shoving past people and heading for the door. Chaos erupted in the courtroom as shouts rang out, chairs overturned, and the officers gave chase. Sarah clung to Marcus, her heart pounding in her chest as she whispered over and over, "You're safe. We're going to keep you safe." But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Whatever Marcus had been caught up in, whoever these people were, they weren't going to let him go without a fight. The courtroom was a frenzy of noise and motion as officers surged after the man, their shouts cutting through the chaos. Sarah clutched Marcus tightly, her heart hammering in her chest. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to find safety, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. Michael stood beside them, his broad shoulders squared as if he could shield them from the storm that had suddenly erupted around them. Detective Harris, calm yet commanding, barked orders into his radio. "Lock down the building. He's not getting out of here. I want all exits covered." The man in the corner, the one Marcus had pointed out, had disappeared into the throng of people trying to flee the courtroom. Harris' voice rang out again. "Keep the family together. Nobody leaves without clearance." Sarah's grip on Marcus tightened as he buried his face in her neck, trembling. She tried to whisper words of comfort, but her voice caught in her throat. For the first time, she felt the full weight of the danger they were in. It wasn't just Marcus's past catching up to them. It was here, now, surrounding them like a tightening noose. Michael leaned closer to Sarah, his voice low but firm. "We need to get out of here. Now, I don't care what the detective says, we can't just wait around for whatever this is to find us." Before Sarah could respond, Detective Harris was at their side. "You're not going anywhere on your own," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My team is sweeping the building. I need you to trust us. We'll keep you safe." The words were meant to reassure, but the flicker of worry in Harris' eyes told a different story. Sarah nodded reluctantly, her trust hanging by a thread. She wasn't sure if she was more terrified of staying or of moving through the unknown. Suddenly, Marcus lifted his head, his voice small but urgent. "He's not alone," he whispered. Everyone froze. Harris crouched to Marcus's level, his gaze steady but questioning. "What do you mean, Marcus? Who else is here?" Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something or someone. "The woman with the red scarf," he finally said. "She was with him before. She's here too." Harris's face darkened and he spoke quickly into his radio. "Be on the lookout for a woman with a red scarf, possible accomplice. Do not approach alone. She could be armed." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Sarah scanned the crowd, her breath catching as she spotted a flash of red near the far exit. A woman, her face partially obscured by the scarf, was moving swiftly toward the door, her movements deliberate and unhurried despite the chaos. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing her out. Harris followed her line of sight and nodded to one of his officers, who began to move in that direction. But before anyone could react further, the woman turned sharply, her eyes locking on Marcus. The look she gave him sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It wasn't just recognition, it was intent, cold, and calculating. The woman reached into her coat, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. Harris' voice roared through the air. "Down. Everyone get down." Michael grabbed Sarah and Marcus, pulling them to the floor behind a row of benches. Sarah's arms wrapped around Marcus, her body acting as a shield as her heart raced wildly. She couldn't see what was happening, but the sound of a scuffle reached her ears, followed by shouts and the unmistakable clatter of something metallic hitting the floor. Weapon secured, an officer shouted. Suspect detained, came another voice. Sarah dared to lift her head, just enough to see the woman in the red scarf being restrained by two officers. Her face was impassive, almost serene, as if she already accepted whatever was coming next. But Sarah's relief was short-lived. Detective Harris was still scanning the room, his posture tense. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, his hand hovering near his sidearm. Michael looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "You've got her, and the other guy is on the run. Isn't that enough?" Harris shook his head. "These people don't operate in twos. If they're here, there's a plan, and until we know what it is, you're still in danger." As if to underscore his words, the lights in the courtroom flickered once, twice, and then plunged the room into darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of confusion and fear. Sarah felt Marcus grip her arm tightly, his small voice breaking through the darkness. "Mommy, I'm scared." Her heart ached, but she forced herself to stay calm. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "We're going to be okay. Just stay close to me." Harris's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and commanding. "Everyone stay where you are. Officers, activate your flashlights and secure the exits." Beams of light began to pierce the darkness, illuminating fragments of the room. The shadows danced and shifted, creating an eerie, almost surreal atmosphere. Michael's hand found Sarah's, his grip firm and reassuring. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. But even as he spoke, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere in the darkness, she felt the weight of unseen eyes, cold and calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The tension in the room was suffocating, every second stretching into an eternity. Harris's flashlight beam landed on a figure near the back of the room, another man, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by a hood. "Don't move," Harris barked, his weapon drawn. The man didn't respond. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as he'd appeared. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as Harris signaled for his team to follow. The officers moved cautiously, their flashlights slicing through the darkness, but the man was gone. Harris turned back to Sarah and Michael, his expression grim. "We need to get you out of here, now." As the officers formed a protective circle around them, Sarah couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, her mind racing with questions. Who were these people? What did they want with Marcus? And most importantly, how far were they willing to go to get it? The answers felt just out of reach, hidden in the shadows that seemed to close in around them. But one thing was certain, the danger was far from over.